The art of ancient Japan. The earliest evidence of life in Japan was about 30,000 years ago. At that time, the four islands that are modern-day Japan were still linked to the East Asian landmass. The Sea of Japan was actually once a lake. Around 15,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the melting glaciers made the sea rise, and it became the Sea of Japan. After that, Neolithic hunter and gatherer societies developed in Japan. Around 5000 BCE, agriculture emerged, and it was mostly based on beans and gourds. About 4,000 years later, they began planting rice, imported by the people living on the mainland, modern-day Korea. The Jomon period, which was from about 12,000 to 300 BCE, was mainly hunters and gatherers living in small communities. Most of the remains that we have today are ceramics. We do know that they highly valued ceramic production. Their pottery was probably based on reed basketry. In the middle of the Jomon period, from about 2500 to 1500 BCE, pottery became very creative. And also during this time, we see larger communities develop. Their pottery is highly individualized, decorative pottery, yet usually functional. Here's an example of some of that individualized decorative pottery from the period. This one's kind of interesting because you see cord-marked decoration on it, also here on the sculptural realm. In the mid to late Jomon period, they used clay to make small humanoid figures. They're really interesting looking. They're not fully realistic. They're more abstracted or distorted. They're shaped into interesting forms, and we call them dogyu vessels. A dogyu is a small human figurine made in Japan during the Jomon period, shaped from clay with exaggerated expressions and in contorted poses. They were probably used in rituals. They usually had very large faces and small arms, hands, and compact bodies. The one that we're looking at here is said to have a cat face with slit eyes and a mouth. It's making a gesture by touching its chest. You can see that there are these marks, these lines on the face. It could be tattooing or scarification. There's a raised area behind the mask that could be a hairstyle, or it could be kind of going on with that cat feline motif. This also could be an illustration of a mask. We just don't really know a lot of these figures, about these figures. We don't know the function. We think that they may have been effigy figures used to represent the owner or someone else. They could be figures used in belief, that they believed that people could transfer illness or unhappy experience into these dogyu figures, and then maybe they would break them to destroy their misfortune. This is based on the fact that many of them have been recovered deliberately broken, so that's one of the theories on what they were used for. The honest truth is we just don't really know a lot about them. Here's another example of a dogyu figure. I just brought this in so you could see that they can vary greatly, but always kind of abstracted or stylized. During the next two periods of Japanese history, the Yayoi, which was 300 BCE to 300 CE, and the Kofun, which was 300 CE to 552 CE, we start to see several features of Japanese culture become established. During these periods, we see rice agriculture become widespread. It was brought from immigrants living on the mainland, so modern-day Korea. We see immigrants also bring more complex forms of society and government. We see large permanent settlements, divisions of labor, hierarchical forms of social organization, and a more centralized government. The trend of a more centralized government took hold in the Kofun period, and Kofun means old tombs. the term means old tombs. And it was named for a large royal tombs that were built during this period. And of course, whenever you see large tombs like this, you know that there's a complex social order. It also shows us that they were venerating their leaders, and it lays the groundwork of the imperial system. It also shows us that by looking inside of these tombs, we see that they worshipped a sun goddess deity and other deities as well. Now, the Kofun tombs were built in the mid-4th century CE. And there are these large keyhole-shaped tombs that were constructed near political centers of Japan. They developed from an earlier circular tomb, and the keyhole shape develops during this period. So originally they just would have had like these circular kind of barrel mounds. Well, the actual shape like this develops during this period. So basically they're mound tombs. The center part is where the grave is. Then they have megaliths that create the tomb chamber. They're covered in earth, and this makes an artificial hill. Now, you would need lots of labor to build something like this. The chamber tombs are built for emperors, and so inside we see grave goods. There's a large amount of pottery to pacify the spirits of the dead and to serve the rulers in their next life. Tomb building was inspired by mainland immigrants from modern-day Korea, and massive tomb sites extended over 400 acres with an artificial hill built over tombs. The early mountains were round, like I mentioned, but these later ones do have this keyhole shape, and this keyhole shape is unique to Japan. Some of them have moats around them, like this one. You can see it has a moat around it. According to the Imperial Household Agency, there are 740 Kofun tombs, and they believe that they were the tombs of ancient imperial family members and their relatives. Although archaeologists kind of debate whether this is a realistic number or an accurate number. They were constructed during this proto-historic period, so there are no documents that discuss these. And by the 8th century, when Japanese history is written, no one knows exactly what these tombs are. So they just assume it was probably for the elite, for the emperor. Now, some of them have been excavated today. But even so, most of them are not open to the public, and that includes even to archaeologists. So archaeologists do have to petition to do archaeological surveys of these tombs, but often they are not granted permission. We know that this culture stopped using the Kofun tombs in the late 6th century with the introduction of Buddhism into Japan. And I just have a couple of more images. This image is from Google Earth that I took a few years ago. And here's what the interior may have looked like. A recreation of the interior. It's a great picture of the one that's surrounded by the moat. And here's an image of how they may have built them up. Looks like a layer of dirt, followed by a layer of rocks, and then probably also covered with a layer of dirt. On top of Kofun tomb hills were placed ceramic sculptures, and these are called haniwas. Early haniwas were simple cylinders, and they may have been like jars with ceremonial offerings. But they later evolved into shapes of ceremonial objects, such as houses and boats. And then they further evolved into things like birds, dogs, deer, monkey, cows, and horses. And then finally, they evolve into human shapes. And so we see the ones that we're looking at here are male and female forms. And they do them in different types and different professions and different classes. And they're ceramics, but they're left unglazed. These show less interest in technical skill than the exploring of the expressive potentials of the simple and bold form. So in other words, they seem to be more interested in the subject matter rather than the technicality of the artistic form. They are never perfectly symmetrical. So in other words, this is a great example because like, oh, it looks like we could kind of cut her right down the middle, but look, this arm is shaped a little bit differently than this arm. So they're never perfectly symmetrical. They are usually slightly off center. Then their eyes are usually placed slightly off center. I can't really tell in this one. And then this one's kind of in shadow, but their eyes are usually off center. They have irregular cylindrical bodies with those unequal arms that I just mentioned. They do have this really lovely kind of characters. They have this lifelike quality and individuality, and they were not mass produced, so they seem to be made specifically perhaps for the patron. We don't really know. They might be guardian figures. We do think there's a link between, that they served as this link between the living and the world of the dead. This one over here is a seated female shaman. So early Japan used shamans, and their shamans were mediums. And these mediums interacted between the natural world and the supernatural worlds. They're just sort of kind of simply designed, yet also intricate. I love this guy's hat, his beard, and his dress. Great amount of detail, even though it is a simplistic depiction. Here's a few more that you can look at. You can see that they vary. Like these are two of the more defined ones, but you can see this is a horse and then some other figures. The Haniwa may be related to beliefs of Shinto. Shinto is the indigenous religion of Japan. It's characterized by a loosely organized belief in several deities called kami. Kami inhabited many different aspects of nature, including particularly unusual and magnificent trees, rocks, and waterfalls. Also living creatures like deer. Nature is venerated through this religion. The earliest sacred areas were places of particular beauty, demarcated by rudimentary stone boundaries and by simple pre-architectural monuments such as rock piles, surmounted by stones indicating the places where sacred presence were first sensed. In the 6th century CE, Buddhism arrives in Japan, and Shinto becomes more organized with shrines, hierarchy of deities, and strictly regulated ceremonies. Before Buddhism, Shinto shrines had been the natural features, such as those rocks or those trees or waterfalls. But when it becomes more organized, we see those monuments. And here is an example of a Shinto monument. This is called the Inner Shrine, and it's on the south coast of Tokyo. It's dedicated to the sun goddess, the legendary ancestor of Japan's imperial family and the founder of the royal line. So it is an ancestral shrine of the imperial family and a natural shrine. It sits among the tall evergreens by a river. And you notice that it's made of wood. So it really, even though it's first built in the 1st century CE, it of course would not have survived this long. So what they do is they actually rebuild it every 20 years. So since the 7th century, they have rebuilt it 61 times. So the last time should have been just a few years ago in 2013. And they built it exactly the same. When they rebuild it exactly the same, and it's built by expert carpenters who have been trained since childhood. So it is both an ancient and endlessly new structure. It is in a compound with other sacred buildings, and the buildings are aligned along the central north-south axis. It's surrounded by thatched and gabled gates and fences, and it's very typical of Shinto architecture. We see wooden piles raising the building off the ground, and a thatched roof. So here are the piles raising the building off the ground, and then we have the thatched roof, and is held in place by these horizontal logs. They use unpainted cypress wood, giving it a feeling of natural simplicity rather than overwhelming it with decoration or size. The use of natural wood shows the Japanese